Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. George Gresham here with some talks about the histories of Denia, Valencia. We are in 14th century, in the 14th century, where we had the start of the Hundred Years' War, the plague, the War of Dos Pedros, of two Peters' War between Castile and Aragon. You remember we were talking about Pedro IV, the ceremonious, who was king of many, many countries. And we also remember that he was participating in this war of two Peters between Pedro IV, the cruel of Castile, and Pedro IV, the ceremonious of Aragon. And now we're going to speak about our little towns, Dénia, Jávea, and what exactly were they doing during this eventful 14th year. 14th century, I'm sorry about this. We start with Dénia being given away as a gift. Wow. So our Chabas, one of the greatest historians of Dénia, is saying, the jewel and piece of greatest value and esteem that had the royal crown of Aragon was the resplendent Dénia, who came out with new brilliance after long eclipse and dark shadow that covered her for as many years as she was under the harsh servitude of the Arabs. She was now receiving new glows with esteem that had the undefeated kings of Aragon of it, that was such that they had no more valuable jewel to adorn and inherit their second children, the most serene infants, but with the title and lordship of Dénia. So it took place in 1323 that King of Aragon, James II, Jaume II, gave away Dénia to his son, not the firstborn son, Don Pedro, not the Pedro ceremonious, no, another Pedro, the Ribarossa. So Dénia was given away from the king's domain to, let's say, private individuals, the infants. And during this giveaway, Palau and Chabas were speaking about how important Dénia was. But whom it was given to? First, yes, to Don Pedro de Ribagorza, and then to his son, Don Alfonso. Don Alfonso de Aragon y Foix, El Viejo, the old one. Of course, the old one. He lived for 80 years, 1332, 1412. He lived quite a while, but we don't have any portraits of him, only on these tiles, and we'll be speaking later where these tiles are, what they're doing there, and so forth. Just read through the list of his titles. The first Count of Denia, 1355, when he was only 23 years old, born in 1332. The Count of Ribagorza, the Captain General of the Kingdom of Valencia, 1363. The first Marquess of Villena or Villena, 1366. The first Constable of Castilla, 1379. The first Duke of Gandia, 1399, and so on and so forth. He was a typical knight of his times. He was the grandson of Jaime II, Jaume II. He was a cousin of the king Pedro IV, the ceremonious, and so on and so forth. Don Alfonso, the old one. So, what we're talking about is how exactly he came to be related to Dénia. What happened? We have to stress that in the Kingdom of Valencia, in the Kingdom of Aragon, there was not a single count, there was not a single marquess or duke before Don Alfonso. Don Alfonso was the first person to actually receive any title in the Kingdom of Valencia, in the Kingdom of Aragon. And it happened in 1355, when he was only 23 years old. Moreover, when he received the title of Marquess of Villena or Villena, later on, again, he was the receiver of the first title, but in the kingdom of Castile. So 1355, the first title in the whole of Aragon and Valencia, the Count of Denia. 1366, the first title of any value, the Marquess of Villena, the same person. 1379, the first constable of Castilla, two different countries, Castile and Aragon. He managed to be everywhere. And then finally he became the Duke of Gandia. It was not the first dukedom already in 1399, but still it was a very, very important position. So who he was? Who was he? Don Alfonso? Well, first of all, Denia was important. She was being told that because of the ancient greatness of Denia, its señor became the first title bearer in the whole kingdom of Valencia. Greatness of Denia? Do you remember what happened? 1244, Reconquista. Denia becomes Christian again. During 13th century, Christians populate this area, the beige one. 1308, excuse me, 1308, the area populated by Christian is as little as that. So Denia was depopulated. I can't say it was a beautiful gift. It was important. It was a military stronghold, but it wasn't such a big town or city or whatever. We don't have too many buildings in Denia which come from that time, from the 14th century. There is an ermita, a hermitage of Santa Lucia, which is actually not far away from where we live. It's about 200 meters that way. It's now an Orthodox church of St. Cyril and St. Methodius, but it was started to be built in the 14th century. So at least we can feel, if I walk that way in about 10 minutes, I'll be walking around the 14th century. So for us, it is important, but giving away Denia was quite a dubious gift because it was really, really nearly empty. Although it was gradually experiencing rebirth, agricultural and so forth. What was actually given away was what we now call Camarca. Camarca is like county. It's a part of a province. We live in the province of Alicante, and the part of the province where we live is called Marina Alta, La Camarca de Marina Alta. And this Camarca, this county of Marina Alta, the Upper Marina, or the Upper C1, is more or less similar to what was given away as a gift and what became the Condado de Dénia, the county of Dénia. The towns Gandia, Denia, Palma near Gandia, Gallinera, Palop, and also already in the private ownership, Pego, Laguar, Halo, Jávea, our neighbor, or Xabia or Xàbia, there are different names to tell them. So this map, or a much later map of the 16th century, shows lots and lots of little towns, villages, all situated in what we now call Marina Alta, and what formed the county of Denia in the 14th century. The first title. How do we know it? We have lots of historians of the town of Denia, but in the not too many of 14th century. Actually, the first one came in 17th century. Marco Antonio Palau. He wrote quite an interesting book, Denia Desenterrada. And then we had Roque Chabas, who lived in 20th century, and he is the author of the most complete book on Denia called Historia de la Ciudad de Denia. Now, Historia del Parlao, that's a little street in the very center, which starts with this building number 1, and it's a completely fantastic restaurant here, a little bar actually, well, where you have to book a table about 3 or 4 months in advance. And it's now closed, of course, but we all hope it will be reopened. As far as monuments is concerned, we have a monument to Roque Chabas in Denia, a very modest one, and a much bigger monument to Roque Chabas in Valencia. So he was an important person. Then, as far as historians were concerned, we had quite a few in 20th, 21st centuries. We have Mrs. Mata, who wrote about Taifa de Denia, Mr. Bremont about Historia de Denia. That's actually a shorter version of Chabad's book, but he also wrote a fantastic book on the history of the Civil War of Denia in 1930s. Then we have Mr. Gisbert Santonia, who is now the chief archaeologist of Denia, and he's written a brochure, Castile de Denia, the Denia's castle in many languages, and lots of other books and articles, very interesting ones. In Valencian, we have Mr. Perez, who wrote a book called Denia, the City and the Castle, where he described very nicely, he described the periods, different periods in the history of the castle. Here it is. Maria Bars is our most famous poet, and Andres Hayen did a very good book in the comic style about the history of Denia. So we have quite a few sources, also including lots of articles on internet, so it's always necessary to put them in some order. Anyway, what was happening in Denia in the 14th century? When Denia was given away in 1355 as a county to Don Alfonso, Pedros IV, being in Avignon, which was at that time the location of the Pope, in the Pope's most sacred chapel, said that he was giving away Denia as a payment for the services provided by Pedro, the father of Don Alfonso, and as an advance for future services to be provided by Don Alfonso himself, who was only 23 years old. And then the war started. So Denia was given away in 1355. In 1356, the War of Two Pedros between Castile and Aragon started, and it was for this area, for Alicante, but most of the war was developing here, around Denia, around Valencia. So in 1358, Don Alfonso, who was already the Count of Denia, wrote to the citizen of Denia, excusing himself that he couldn't come over to see his new vassals because he was busy at war. 1363, 1364, two sieges of Valencia, after which Valencia became double loyal, LL, double loyal to the kings of Aragon, to Pedro IV, the ceremonious. Our Don Alfonso, the owner of Denia, was the head of the defense of Valencia, Captain General of the Kingdom of Valencia. The same year, 1363, Don Alfonso agrees with Henry of Trastamara of Castile that he would give his support to Henry in his fight for the throne of Castile, and in exchange, Henry would raise our Don Alfonso to the rank of Signor of Villena. If you remember, he became the Marquess of Villena, but in 1368. But there was one little problem. Yes, Don Alfonso started supporting the war, started supporting Henry the Trastamara in his war against Pedro I of Castile, but the first round of events wasn't very, very lucky for the Enriquist side and for the Aragonese side, because there was a battle at a place called Nájera, and Black Prince, the English Black Prince, was on the side of Pedro I the Cruel. He was a great knight, a great military commander, the Black Prince, and so the joint British Castilian forces took over. There was a big defeat for Enrique de Trastamara and for his supporters. And our Don Alfonso, together with his two sons, were captured. Our Don Alfonso and his junior son spent just a few months in captivity. His senior son spent 25 years in captivity in Burgundy. What do you imagine? And of course, how was our Don Alfonso as his sons? Well, how did they find their freedom? Well, they had to pay ransom. And where did they get the ransom? Denia. And all the places around our little town were paying So what happened to Denia was not very good. Denia and the county of Denia. The modern historian Julia Campon Gonzalva wrote an article, Consequences of the War of Two Pedros in the county of Denia. And she is saying that there were lots of problems. First of all, Muslims, who were actually the most industrious part of the population, who were working in the agriculture, lots of them were taken as slaves. Then came about the destruction and depopulation of different places and villages. Some of them never arrived again, never emerged again. As she's writing, Denia sufrió, the citizen of Denia, sufrió en sus propias carnes. They felt on their own flesh the presence of the Castilian troops, because the Castilian troops were here in Denia, in Calpa. They were besieging Valencia, which is 100 kilometers that way. Moreover, the citizens of Denia were accused of being traitors by the Aragonese side, by Pedros IV. Although all the means of life were destroyed, the mills, the gardens, and so on and so forth. Moreover, they had to pay. They had to pay the ransom for their Don Alfonso, for their señor. So it says Mrs. Gonzalez says that Don Alfonso took a mortgage for the future. And the mortgage was paid for about half a century by the good citizens of Dénia and of the county of Dénia. Meanwhile, Gandia, which is only 50 kilometers from us, started gradually developing, growing, flowering. So to a certain extent, it happened at the cost of our places. So for us, the middle of the 14th century was not very happy for us, citizens of Dénia. Meanwhile, Don Alfonso was having his fantastic meteoritic career. So first, he became the Count of Dénia in Aragon or in Valencia, which is the same. Then he became the Marquess of Villena. And then, already when the Trastamara dynasty were sitting at the throne on the throne of Castilla, he was promoted to become the first constable in the history of Castilla. Constable being the second most important person in the kingdom after the king himself, the person looking after the king's stables. So actually the title itself comes from comes stabule, so the friend of the monarch in his stables. And I love how Chabas describes the ceremony during which our Don Alfonso was sworn as a constable, kneeling before the king. He set him a ring of gold on a finger of the right hand. Then the king stretched out a naked sword and a banner, and Don Alfonso, taking them, swore that for fear of death, he would not fail to protect, to defend the faith, to defend the king, and to make the earth of Aragon flourish. So it was quite a great ceremony during which our Don Alfonso became the first constable of Castilla. Later on, lots of things happened, but we'll switch over for a while to our area. Yes, we described that Denia didn't took nicely the times of the War of Two Peters, middle of 14th century. Very much the same was happening in Xàbia or Jávea. This is our sister town, neighboring town, just 15 kilometers that way across the mountain, or rather around the mountain of Mongo. First of all, it's very hard to say what is the correct pronunciation of this town, because in Valencia it is Xàbia, in Spanish, in Castellano, it is Jávea. Well, sometimes it's pronounced Xàbia or Xàbia. We stress, and Chabas was stressing, that it is not a town called Sedibicula, which was mentioned by Ptolemy. Where does this strange name come from? Well, some are thinking that it's from Habega or Chabega, which is a fishing net. Some are thinking that Chivia meant rich, filled up, and so forth. Lots of people lived in that area because there's a very nice river valley. The river is called River Gorgos. So beginning from Romans, Phoenicians, Visigoths, Moors, they all lived there. But by 1244, the valley was not that well populated. And gradually, after the Reconquista, people started settling down in Xàbia. And our Chabas is saying, we cannot describe the history of Denia without describing the history of her sister, Xàbia, who was experiencing the same triumphs and the same sorrows as Denia. So the first mention of Xàbia, in modern times, in our times, which we are studying, was exactly in this century, 14th century, in 1321. And it was mentioned as Alqueria or Calle of Denia. Alqueria is a suburb. Calle is a street. So a street of Denia. What kind of street? It's 15 kilometers from here via Serpentine. But anyway, it was obviously a very, very sort of lower rank legal position of Xàbia, not being a separate town or whatever. And 60 years later, already the good citizen of Xàbia and the council of the villa of Dénia had a dispute as regards their rights and obligations, and they took it to Don Alfonso, who was their señor. So in May 1380, we have 100 years war, we have Wat Tylers in a year's time in England, and they're disputing between their rights and obligations. Who will be judging the disputes, for instance? So they took their dispute to Don Alfonso. And why we know it is because at that time already, Xàbia was called a lugar. A lugar is a place, like a little village, Joch, in other words. So it was called as a lugar or Joch de Xàbia. By the way, Xàbia has a fantastic museum. Unfortunately, it's a little bit better than the museum in Dénia. Xàbia has a very strong, something like a fortress of a church in the very center of the town, Saint Bartholomew. So it is really, really worth visiting. And what also is important is that the Xàbia surroundings are beautiful. We have this Cape of San Anthony, which actually separates Denia. Denia is behind there. This is our mountain Mongol, then the Capes of St. Anthony. Then goes Xàbia, which first has lots of stony beaches, then a fantastic sandy beach called Arenal, and then stony beaches as well, and little bays, which are called here colors. There are about 10 different colors. They're absolutely picturesque. This first color from Xàbia is called Cala Blanca, the white bay, and then there are lots of others. So it's very good to walk around, but you should be living in Denia and going to Xàbia for a walk, as we do. But now we're going to talk about San Antonio. This was one of the most important capes for the navigation. Even now there is a lighthouse there. But of course, in those places, Denia and Xàbia were underpopulated in the 13th and 14th century. So what can we say about San Antonio? San Antonio, Rocky Chabas, he was a historian, but to a certain extent, he was a poet. The Cape of San Antonio, or the peninsula, in the ancient time was called Ferrara Peninsula because they actually produced iron here. And he was saying that it cuts into the sea, dividing the waters of the Sucrones and Ilicitani bays. Sucrones is after Júcar or Sucre, which was a river and a very important river. The whole bay, which is now called the Bay of Valencia, was called the Bay of Sucre or Sucronese Bay. And on the other hand, there was Ilisi, Santa Pola, quite far away from here, but the actual bay was called Ilisitania. And what Rocky Chabas is describing is, the weather, the rocks, the sea beats against its flanks, roars in caves dug by constant battles with the waves. The extremity of this promontory is seen to be the result of a terrible shaking of the globe. It must have been cut out of lead when it came out of the bowels of the earth after some earthquake. Here, the south seems cut off from this world. It sees God in the immensity of the sea that stretches at his feet, in horizons filled with seas of light. It seems that such places need a soul that understands them, that would be able to know the mysterious cries of the waves. Poetry, sheer poetry. Could people live there? Yes. But which kind of people? Well, monks. Monks who were praying to God and living there in nearly absolute desert. Yes, we can now drive there in 15 minutes, but at that time, the very top of the cape, it wasn't the cape, it was a peninsula, a promontory. So it was quite plain, it was called Planes. And now we have a Santuari Mare de Deo des Angels, so the sanctuary of God Mother with angels. Here it is on the photograph. But at that time in the 14th century, first 3 and then 12 monks arrived there. They started living there, they started praying there, they started calling themselves San Geronimo Hermitage under the Friar Ibanez, Jaime Juan Ibanez. Then some people from Italy, some monks from Italy came over, and finally 3 of them in 1373 traveled to Avignon, where the Pope's court was situated, to Pope Gregory XI, and asked him to permit them to found a monastery. So a bishop was sent there. He confirmed to the Pope that there were 40 monks. They were hijos de la penitencia, so they were really living and praying to God, and the permission was given. 1374, the sanctuary was started being built, the monastery. But unfortunately, in 1386, pirates from Algiers came to this place and actually destroyed it, killed Friar Ibanez, and that was a great disaster. By the way, all these tiles are now located in Sanctuary Mare de Deo. And this only portrait of Don Alfonso, which we've seen already, it is depicted, Don Alfonso is depicted on the tiles in the sanctuary. In 1388, having seen this disaster, Don Alfonso agreed for the monks to move nearer to Gandia, because Gandia was already a prospering town. And he started the monastery at Catalba. It's a beautiful place, not too easy to visit because it's only open on with the weekends, but it will be very important in our 6th chapter, because it was really the birthplace of the modern Valencian literature. And it was called, as the one here on San Antonio, it was called the Convent of San Geronimo, the Catalba. So now we can still visit in Planes here on Cape San Antonio, the Santuary, the sanctuary. Look at these tiles and then drive to Gandia. Gandia is interesting, Gandia is important because by 1380s, you remember, Dénia, Xàbia, lied in ruins, were absolutely destroyed financially after the Two Peters War, whilst Gandia started prospering because Don Alfonso was important on himself, Constable of Castilla. By 1399, having supported a new king, Martin the Human, he also was promoted to the rank of Duke. And he was building quite a lot of things that are interesting structures in Gandia. First of all, this is the actual monastery of Catalba. It is a private construction now, so you have to ask about the times, the visiting times. But this staircase, this Renaissance staircase, is really something to see. In Gandia itself, the main church, Collegiata de Santa Maria, was starting being built in the 14th century, so our century. and the ducal palace, because our Don Alfonso was the first Duke of Gandia. The ducal palace, the very construction of ducal palace was started in the 14th century, although of course this outlook came in later on, excuse me, in the 16th century, 16th to 17th century. Now, Don Alfonso de Aragon was a cultured person, and he wrote himself a book, Yetre de Castigs y Bons Nundrimants, which was a troubadour poetry. Great. And he was promoting literature, poetry. So he actually gave birth to the golden age of Valencian literature. So it actually occurred not that much in Valencia, but more in Gandia. So when we're talking 14th and 15th century, we have for a while to forget about Dénia, even about Valencia, and remember about Gandia. But now we finish the 14th century. Thank you very much for your attention. See you soon. It was George Grisham. Bye.